Okay, come on in, class. Sit down. Come take your seats. Relax. Settle down, settle down, settle down, settle down, settle down, settle down, settle down. I think we're about ready to get our lesson today. As you well know, this is Networking 101. Yes, an introduction to IT course just for you. Just for you. Just for you. So, if you're new here, welcome. Sit down. It's time to settle in, get comfy, and start learning. Now, you may be asking yourself, why am I here? What is networking? Did I even want to learn this today? And the answer is yes to all of them, okay? Don't think about it, just feel it. Inhale it in your lungs and exhale it in your bones, okay? It's gonna stay in your body. Now ask yourself, what is networking, right? And that's what I'm here to explain to you. Networking, in terms of information technology, is essentially communicating between one network to another, right? We're passing the information of data traffic or internet traffic from one place to another. That's all it is. Networking comes in many different forms, and there's many different ways to do what you needed to do. It's almost like having Google Maps and taking multiple different routes on Google Maps and you deciding what's an important route versus what's not. Like, for example, let's say you want to go to the grocery store, but the quickest way to do that would save you 10 minutes, but you'd have to pay a toll. Is it worth it? Not sure. Let's say you want to take another path, but that other path, it kind of has a lot of bumpy roads. Do you still want to take that path and get there in a little bit, about the same amount of time? It's totally up to you. But that's the very, very, very basic overview of, what networking is. Now, to start off this lesson, I want to give you an introduction, right? I'm your teacher tonight. I'm here to help you settle down, relax, and learn a little bit with me tonight. I do have extensive history in networking, so I am qualified to explain it to you noobs, okay? So sit back, relax, and let's start. One of the first things when thinking about a network or networking is, what's your goal, right? Now, it's not just let me learn any and everything all at once. I want to be a super senior engineer. No. Is your goal to make tons of money and have like the highest responsibility at your job, or do you kind of want to chill and be on the break fix side? Like, if something breaks, you fix it. And even in those roles, sometimes it can get really hectic. So you gotta sit back and think of what kind of, jobs you'd like to do, right? So I can show you. Give me a moment here to pull up the lesson. So you can start with something like a network administrator. They kind of manage day-to-day operations and prepare for maintenances and configuring new things and resolving troubles, kind of like a break fix. You can be a network engineer where you're specifically tailoring your work to engineering things, so creating something new and designing and making sure you have like services multiple companies, there can be something, or it's not as often, but there's like a lot of in-house. So you work for a company doing internal IT instead of working for another company doing external, you know. You can do like network technician or like support, which in this case is like hands-on. You can, go to locations. You can actually install the routers or switches. You can install those things in network racks. You can plug up cables and do anything like that. Then there's cloud network engineer, and that is an entirely different bracket. It still maintains the fundamentals of networking, but you have to have knowledge and somewhat of a focus on cloud technologies such as AWS, Microsoft Azure, Oracle, any of those big ones. And then there is like a network operations engineer. That type of job is kind of like you're always monitoring and maintaining the network, and your primary focus is catching things as soon as they go down, break. It's pretty much just the break fix. Something breaks, you're there to respond. Something needs immediate attention, you're there to respond. Something has an issue and it's maybe not broken, but you have to put your attention to it, you're there to respond. I myself come from that background of network operations engineer. So break fix, there was alarms, there's things you need to trigger, there's constant pings. These things are all important, and all these jobs have their own, their own aspects to them. One of them I also forgot to mention is like a DevNet engineer or network automation engineer. That is a type of network engineering where you're mixing scripting or coding like Python, automation technologies into networking. So for example, you have a network that has 1,000 devices. You're not going to go in every single device and make a network change to every single device. No, you want to write a script that will write one network change across all of them at the same time. So that's like a network automation engineer or DevNet engineer. Okay. To just start this lesson into some very basic terminology and very basic understanding. In order to understand networking, you need to understand the fundamentals of information technology. So, by definition, information technology is the use of computers, storage, networking, and other physical devices, infrastructure, and processes to create, store, secure, and exchange all forms of electronic data. So, if you've ever heard the term the Internet of Things, this is that all of these things are able to communicate with one another somehow in some way, right? There's other technologies such as Wi-Fi, such as Bluetooth, and these can also help communicate, right? Now, with that being said, if we use the example of a computer, let's say you have a laptop. You have one laptop that's capable of using Wi-Fi and an Ethernet cable for you to connect to your router, right? Or let's say you're trying to connect to Wi-Fi, you'd usually connect to an access point, right? That computer has the accessibility to pull up a web page, store information, communicate, send emails, reach the internet in order to send emails, and it's communicating. So that, in a nutshell, is what information technology is, right? Okay, let's continue. Very, very basic and fundamental. What you need to understand as far as what information technology is the OSI model. Now, This is a model that is like a framework, right? It is the framework that standardizes network communication into 7 stacked layers. I used to have an acronym for it, but it's very inappropriate, but it's how I was able to remember all the layers in the OSI model. But essentially, you have the physical layer. This is the physical piece on whatever piece of hardware you're looking at. This is responsible for transmitting raw bit stream data over something physical. So like in the example of the laptop I gave you, the physical layer would be the Ethernet port. The Ethernet port on that laptop. You could even say the Wi-Fi card that is inside the motherboard on that laptop. But in the example, to make it easy, we'll say the Ethernet port. Got it. The next layer up is the data link layer. This is the layer that defines the format of data on the network. So in a network or in a device that's sending traffic, if I wanted to send a ping to Google, and I can get to that in the next class. If I wanted to communicate to Google, this is the layer that helps figure out where to kind of send that information, if you will. It's a prerequisite. Okay. The next layer is the network layer. This layer decides which physical path the data will take. So for example, let's say my router only has 2 ports and those 2 ports are filled up. If I needed to physically connect my laptop to my router, I would need to use a switch. The switch would break out my network to send it to my router, right? The switch could be consisting of like a minimum of 4 ports to a maximum of like 52, right? The network layer will then decide, okay, I'm going from my laptop to this port on the switch, then from the port on the switch to the router, okay? The transport layer is the next one. This transmits data using transmission protocols including TCP and UDP traffic, which we will cover in the next lesson. Essentially, it decides how it's going to communicate, like what type of language it's going to use, if you will. That will be the best way to describe that. The next layer is the session layer. This maintains connections and is responsible for controlling ports and session. This kind of gets us into like a higher level understanding, which we can break down in another class with me. But essentially, it is responsible for maintaining that communication between Google, right? You got the physical layer, like where you're connecting to the data link layer, figuring out how it's going to communicate, what words to use. The network layer, it figures out what path it's going to take, right, from the laptop to the switch to the router. You have the transport layer. It's figuring out what language is going to use to communicate. And then you have the session layer, which is essentially responsible for keeping that communication open. Then you have the presentation layer. This layer is past pretty much all that physicality of things, and you're getting into the usable format where data encryption occurs. So let's say you work for a company and you have a VPN, right? That VPN is meant to encrypt your network and your data. That's what the presentation layer is for. The last but not least layer is the application layer. This layer is the human to computer interaction layer, where applications can access the network services. I mean, to make something complicated are you going to